Hello, I'm here with Randolph Heard, the head writer of Transformers Cyberverse.
Hi.
We're going to talk about the conception of the show from season 1 to season 4.
I think that's awesome.
The first question I wanted to ask you is, how did you become attached to Cyberverse in the first place?
Right. So before Cyberverse, Hasbro was planning a completely different show, a 22-minute long show as they had been doing. Had a really cool idea to it. I went in and pitched for that show, and I met this executive, Mike Hauser, and afterwards he was kind of excited about my pitch. It was kind of a jumble of things. One thing I pitched was that Grimlock would have two different personalities. Another thing was about descending down into Cyberverse and discovering like ancient parts of Cyberverse. And so he basically said, I really want you involved in some way, and maybe like as a consultant or whatever for this other show. And then I didn't hear from him for a couple months. Then he contacted me and said, you were talking about like what do these guys do when they're not fighting a millennia-long war? And how would you feel about writing up a document? You mentioned sports, like a document about what kind of sports Transformers would play. And so I did 3 to 4 pages and something called Cube. And I submitted that and then just never heard anything. And usually you hear something like, this sucks, or do another draft or whatever. I didn't hear anything. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. And a few months passed, and then suddenly I got contacted, and I was told that someone very high up had decided, yeah, let's not do the 22-minute show. Let's do an 11-minute show. And let's do it right now because we're late on the production schedule. And I'm like, oh, and they asked me to come in and pitch on it. So I was given a few tips. They wanted it to connect to Bumblebee the movie, so that they wanted it to start with Bumblebee having amnesia. Ironically, of course, the show came out before the movie because of the way movie schedules worked. So it made no sense that Bumblebee had amnesia, but maybe it did if it came out after the movie. Maybe it does now. That was one thing, and the other thing was they really wanted to try to expand the property and take a look at some of the key past events. So that was sort of the mandate going into the pitch. I made my pitch. I heard back very quickly, and they said, great, you need to hire writers next week. I was like, oh, that's weird because normally you write like a Bible. You write a pilot that might go through several drafts to establish the tone of the show. So I met with writers the following week, like all day long. And out of those people, I picked Gavin Hignite, Zach Atkinson, Kate Leth, and our production assistant was Dan Zagarolo, who wrote a lot of episodes. So by the end of that day, it was really exhausting. I had my staff, and then we just had to start. And so, I mean, the 11-minute thing was a real blow because, like, comedy works well in 11 minutes. But how do you do a Transformers show, which I feel you couldn't sacrifice any element of it? You need action, you need humor, you need tragedy. I mean, Optimus Prime died. Like, that, I feel like, is part of the canon. So we needed tragedy. And also, I kind of wanted a continuing story. And at that time, Hasbro wasn't that excited about a continuing story, but we kind of sneaked it in a bit anyway. So we started writing, all 4 of us. So you had 4 scripts going at once, trying to understand what the show was. And I think I'm not proud of the first 4 episodes. I think they turned out really flat, and that's part of the reason we didn't know what it was until we did number 5, Megatron is my hero. And suddenly we thought, okay, this is our attitude. This is how we're going to handle this show. And the very first episode, though, I wrote that, not proud of it, but I kind of set it in the desert and decided like this is what I always thought Transformers shows seemed to look like to me. Like they're set in the desert and then like there's very few backgrounds. I said we're going to start there and drive out of that old Transformers environment into a new one. Because I actually didn't know anything about Transformers. Like I just knew the general knowledge thing, like Optimus Prime and Bumblebee and also Soundwave. Like, and then that was actually part of the reason I got hired was because I wasn't a super fan, so that I could take a more objective look at it. The people I hired, it turned out almost coincidentally, I'd never met any of them before, were all specialists. They were fans of certain eras of Transformers. So as we had our discussions about the characters and what we wanted to draw from the past, I could ask a G1 fan like Gavin, does this make sense? Like, who is this character? Why does he have those weird things on his back? And they would explain to me these things, and I'd be like, either that makes sense or that doesn't make sense, and we need to fix that. So we started really intensely. It was a very intense schedule the first season. So I'm not sure what your question was now. How did I get involved? That's how I got involved. So Mike Hauser, the executive there, thanks to him, He thought I was the right person for it. And one of the things I said to the staff, I gave a speech, was we're not going to let the 11-minute format hold us back, no matter what. We're here. We're lucky to have this opportunity. We're going to do a great show, and we're going to make it somehow work. And I feel like ultimately that that occurred. So happy about that.
All right. In season 1, Margaret Scott wrote an episode, and then also in, I think, season 2, Make Cat joined.
Uh-huh.
Those are the 2 writers that you haven't mentioned that I can think of. How did they come on board?
Margaret had worked on previous Transformers shows, was recommended to me by Hasbro, and so she was working on, I forgot, a Marvel show at the time. So she had time for freelance, and we gave her one script. So that was just the way that worked out. But she was in general busy. And May Cat came to us because she was recommended to us. I read her feature spec and liked it a lot. And I liked how OCD she was about her cosplay. And I thought that perhaps if she was, because she had never had a staff writing job, and I think she'd only done one script for Young Justice before that. But I was hoping that because she was OCD about her cosplay, that that would mean that that transferred to her work on a show. So she stayed for 2 seasons. Now she's off on the Nickelodeon one, and then we brought in Masai Singleton, who's also working on the Nickelodeon one. So there's always been the core of myself, Gavin, Zach Atkinson, and Dan Sagarola, who's our production assistant. He became our writing assistant and then a staff writer, but he wrote throughout. So at least we've had a core of consistent people, and that's really helped the show maintain its identity.
And then looks like you already touched some of question 2. I was going to ask how much of the show's premise was conceived by the writers versus Hasbro.
Right. Yeah. So and then we added as much as we could. I mean, it was a great pleasure to go back and depict different events from the history of Transformers and to be the first ones to have done that. So we were cool with that. It sort of started to naturally evolve away from that original premise. And then, by season 2, we were out of that original premise, which I think we were all happy about because it was cool. But like the voice thing, the radio voice was meant to be actually actual radio voices, like other people's voices. And Jeremy did a great job of doing those voices, but we were actually going to have an old lady do one, but that all turned out to be impossible because of budget. So it was great when Bumblebee finally got rid of his amnesia, and we were free to have him talk like a normal robot person. Anyway, so yeah.
All right. I wanted to ask, was Cyberverse produced in conjunction with a TV network, like Animated was produced at Cartoon Network, or was it all just internally at Hasbro?
This is a good question because it really speaks to why we were able to do what we were able to do. This was a Hasbro production. They paid for it, and then they had a deal with Cartoon Network to show it on Cartoon Network. The cool thing about that is that when you're dealing with a network, you have a layer of executives who have preconceived notions perhaps about what their network might want. And you also have Hasbro then. So you've got 2 layers of people that are going through it. With this, we just worked with Hasbro. Our executive, Mike Hauser, was really supportive, an amazing guy. Like, he really knew how to sell our ideas upwards and how to help us understand what needed to be done. But we also had some great Zoom meetings with the toy people where we both understood that we loved the same thing. Like, we talked to the brand people and we realized these guys love Transformers toys. That's why they're doing this job. And they liked the odd ideas we were coming up with. And so it was kind of actually relaxing. Once they trusted us, we were allowed to do as we saw fit pretty much. So it was a Hasbro production, and the benefit was, more support in a lot of ways, or, just they didn't expect us to have a moral or to, they wanted a good show, entertaining show that showed off certain things. So each season they would ask us to showcase certain aspects of the toys, but not in a way that restricted us.
All right, cool. And then this is kind of a nerdy question. You said you would check with your production assistant. When did each season kind of get greenlit, go into production, and in production?
So as I said, this replaced what they were planning on doing, which was a 22-minute show. There was already a production schedule laid out for this 22-minute show. Wow. And so we fell into that schedule. Ordinarily, you do a show, do 1 season, wait to hear, are they going to renew? And then you come back and, but because there was this schedule already laid out, we were basically, I think we got going in spring 2017. and it was just laid out straight through for the first 3 seasons without a break. So that gave a lot of coherence to our writing, but it was also really intense. Like we didn't have any break at all. So 2017 through to I'm not exactly sure. And then there was a gap between that and the 4th season.
All right, cool. I think I want to ask a follow-up question. What were they planning to do with that 22-minute show that they'd conceived before Cyberverse? Are you allowed to say anything?
I don't know. I'm really careful about NDA stuff, non-disclosure agreements, and I feel like Hasbro pays for it. They own the right. They may do something with it earlier. Personally, I thought it was super cool. I don't know. I can't really talk about it much more. I think
No worries.
I shouldn't. Yeah. But we actually incorporated a little bit of the ideas from it, like by showing the past. I'll say that much. By showing very key past events. So, yeah.
All right, and then. This is something I've been wondering for a very long time. Why is the show called Cyberverse? What is a Cyberverse?
That's a great question. The simple answer to that question is we failed to come up with a good title. The writers, we were asked to come up with a title for the show, and it's for some reason we got really stuck. Like, what is a good title? And we submitted several finally, and they didn't like them, which is great because we didn't like them either. And then finally, they just told us it's going to be called Cyberverse. And I think that one of the things is they had previously had a Cyberverse show, so legally they owned that name.
It was a toy line in 2011.
The massive world of Transformers can be yours to command. Transformers Cyberverse, collect the world. Figures and action sets each sold separately, change time may vary.
So they had never used it for a show, but they owned the name. So we didn't have to go through any kind of legal check. So, at first we were kind of like, Cyberverse, oh, yuck, what's that? And then, Stockholm syndrome sets in really quickly when you're working on something. And we're like, it's like you love it. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Now we're going to move to season 1 questions. What was the team's process when mapping out like a season-long arc, a show-long arc, but also like the events within each individual 11-minute episode?
Right. So some people plan everything, literally plan everything in advance, write it all out. And I'm not into that because I feel like you lose a lot. Like you learn as you write the show. And so you can make it better. You realize, Starscream's much better when he's doing this or whatever. And so you incorporate that and change the stories. So what we would do is use a whiteboard and write out a general arc that we thought was going to happen, but we were open to change. And I did something with our team that I don't think it's usually done that much in animation. I'm a really big fan of what I call the hive mind, like that people together are smarter than just me. And that so we basically did this thing where once we had a script, we would talk about all the premises together, the outlines together. And once we had a script, we'd put it up on the projector and we'd read through it, we'd act it out together, and then we'd rewrite it together, which for me is awesome in the sense of everybody had a different kind of vibe. So they would be watching for that vibe and protecting what they loved about Transformers, or adding in a joke here or an action beat here. And so we had the best of everybody, but it's a terribly horrifying experience for a writer, at least at first, because it's really embarrassing to have your work critiqued in public. But it's not about critiquing the person, it's about us all trying to make the show as best as we can. And as writers, we work together, I feel like, to help each other and protect ourselves against the public, to make it as good as we can so that it's really strong. So I think the process was really hard at first, and then things turned out really well each time we did it. The scripts became really good. And I think everyone started to appreciate that, and it became our working method. So it was intense because then we were very long days, all in the same room, talking about Cyberverse all the time. Yeah. So, and then in individual episodes, sometimes it was a master plan, and sometimes there was a lot of whim involved into who we might incorporate and what story we might incorporate. We knew where we were heading for season 1. Season 1, we wanted to head to what we saw as the moment before G1. Although, of course, Windblade's in it. There's a different type of Grimlock. There's differences. But that's what we saw that ending as the moment before G1. And so that was always our goal.
Then it looks like you covered this as well, but what were some of the team's biggest struggles in development and writing?
I'm sorry. I was going to say the drugs. The drugs. the constant like inability to write at all, the passing out, and the no. So our biggest struggles, I don't know, like like I said, there was a period at the beginning where we were just trying to key into what the show was. That's always a huge thing. That's usually solved by a Bible and a pilot. And once we had it, it was a grueling thing because especially in the first season, the schedule was really intense. But I think that we started to really enjoy the privilege of working on this. And I can talk more about things like, inventing Shadow Striker was a great thing. So the bad things were the grueling schedule, and the rest of it was, there's a problem with CG, right? Which is you have a budget. With a drawn, a 2D show, you can have Transformers transform all the time. But with a CG show, if you have a transformation, like say they transform into a car, that counts as a second character. And we were only allowed 8 characters per show. So we had to choose carefully, like, are we going to have Bumblebee and his transformation? Well, we have to. But is there another character that we could wait on their transformation, and then we could get another character in? And so that's why the show starts off very constricted, and then we start to have more and more characters in play. So by the end of the first season, we were able to put out a lot of folks and know that we were going to start the second season with a good amount of characters. That's one of the hardest things in dealing with CG. You have to build up as you go along.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. You wanted me to ask you, why was there a time gap between seasons 1 and season 2?
Yeah, because a lot of people were confused by that. And, there's a very simple reason. We were all in unison on we did not want to rewrite G1. G1 is G1. We didn't want to touch it. Like, let it sit, let it be, And so that's why we took the season up to what we felt was just before when G1 would start. And then it cuts to, I don't know if it's 30 years later or whatever. Hopefully after the events of G1, we're cheating a little bit, but like basically give the feeling that G1 can happen on its own. We didn't rewrite it. We're doing something new. And it also freed us up a lot to cut in towards the end of the war and get them off Earth, because Earth was a problem for us, because we couldn't show much of Earth, as people did notice, because that stuff, again, the budget. Like we had an episode that was set in a human city, and it was about Bumblebee, who's amnesiac, having to learn to infiltrate a human city and act like a normal car. And like how difficult that was for him to not talk and to not like act crazy. And but we couldn't build a city and we couldn't build the humans. We only had one human in the show, and I've had fought tooth and nail to get that kid in there, so that we could have just one little nod to humanity there.
Cyberverse takes place like in its own continuity, its own dimension, where it isn't connected to anything. When you guys were writing the show, did you see it like as in continuity with G1? Because you've brought that up a lot.
Well, I came to this again without a lot of Transformers knowledge, and I was directed to TF Wiki, and I started reading TF Wiki, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't understand anything. Is this a multiverse, or why are there so many variations on things? I'm never going to learn this thing or understand it. And fortunately, my staff were very helpful in that regard. But I think that Cyberverse to me was like, because I came from the outside in a way, like I looked at it as a big box of toys, and I could play with any of them. And that's how kids are, right? They're not going to distinguish between a Marvel toy, a DC toy, and something else. If they're cool, they'll make a battle between anything. And so to me, I felt the freedom, like, yeah, I'll just pick stuff, and no one said no. In fact, they seemed delighted that we were bringing back characters. And I think that my staff would confirm one of the first things I did was I researched lists of weirdest Transformers ever. And I got really obsessed with a lot of them. And I think that we definitely saw some of them in the show. I just thought, and like, Rack and Ruin came up from that. Like, I was, oh my God, there was a Siamese twin Transformer, and nobody's ever done it. And, I had to. So it's like, it was really just a case of playing with toys, and having fun. Like, I felt like that was another thing I really emphasized to our writers. We're really lucky to be doing this. Let's have fun, and hopefully that translates to the audience.
Who exactly directed you to the TF Wiki?
Oh, that was Hasbro.
Wow.
Yeah, Mike Hauser. He said, because I said I don't, I confessed to him, and he said that's fine. check out the TF Wiki and that'll tell you everything you need to know. And I was kind of like, it told me too much, I just, it was, overwhelming. And I love TF Wiki. They have such great writers.
It's so funny.
They're hilarious. Yeah.
Well, my understanding is that like everyone in the writer's room writes kind of every episode, every script, but then, on individual episodes, like you're credited with the Battle for Cybertron 4-part. Gavin Hignight's the only one credited with Megatron. Was it just kind of like to kind of boost up each writer's individual resume? Like it's more important?
No, it's like basically the way the work would go is also animation works like this. It like goes up, it starts slow, 1 episode, 2 episodes, 3 episodes. Around then you're starting to get feedback, like animatics or notes and things. And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of a season and there's like 10 different things to do at once. So what would happen is we discuss the premise, we'd submit the premise, that person who is assigned would go off and write an outline per the notes that we did on the whiteboard. We'd note it all out, like what was going to be in the outline. They'd take a picture, they'd write that. Well, we continued to discuss the next episode. Then they'd come back with the outline. We'd go through it all together before that document reached Hasbro. And then, and the same thing, and then they'd go off and write the script the same way. They'd have all the beats that we were wanting in that script. They'd photograph the whiteboard, take it home, and write a script. Then they'd bring it in, and we would treat that script like a first draft, but try to turn it into a second draft before Hasbro even saw it. So sometimes we ended up completely rewriting the script together because it was necessary, or sometimes we didn't touch it as much. But that was the basic process. So people would leave the writing room to go off write a script and then come back. You needed someone to pilot, and be in charge and to turn something in on time. So that's why each writer has an individual credit, but everyone's also credited as, I can't remember the credit, but it's like writer's team or writer's staff writers. That's what it is.
All right. So then now we can move on to season 2.
Season 2.
By season 2, a lot of the things that fans didn't like about season 1 were gone. The radio voice, you completely abandoned the flashback structure as well. What discussions did the team have post season 1 to discuss like what worked and what didn't going into the season 2?
Yeah, I mean, there was some pressure to keep the structure of season 1, that was the concept for the entire show. And I pushed back hard against that because the show was growing in a certain direction, it felt like, and I felt like we all felt like we knew the direction it was growing in. I couldn't really exactly describe it in one sentence the way you're supposed to do with Hollywood things. And so, the things that the fans didn't like, we were seeing stuff back and we felt exactly the same way, that's just how it was, and we were watching the animatics, we were seeing, early animation and seeing what worked and didn't work. So we had feedback toward the end of the first season. And we also wanted more freedom to tell stories that, fit how we felt about the characters.
And this is another question that you've kind of touched on already. Season 2 pulled a lot of cult classic characters from previous shows, continuities, Skybite, Bludgeon, Rack and Ruin.
Yes.
How did the show team and the toy team decide which characters to pull?
Right. And this wasn't really exactly designed as Easter eggs for the audience. This was really designed because for me, I really just wanted to see these characters because I thought they were really cool. The staff bought me a non-Hasbro but expensive Bludgeon toy as a gift, and I was just like, oh my God, this is beautiful. I mean, and so I wanted Bludgeon in the show. And I also found that some of the weirder characters were really cheap on eBay, like only a few dollars. So I was starting to collect as many odd ones as I could and wanted to see them come alive. And Hasbro was great. They didn't have a problem with it. In fact, they seemed delighted that we were digging around. And I don't think they ever said no on anything. I will say that in the first season, since we've moved past first season, they did ask us to create a female Decepticon. And so that was exciting. And that female Decepticon turned out to be Shadow Striker. And the guidance they basically gave us was create a female Decepticon. And everything else we filled out, and really proud of how she developed. So yeah, I mean, we put those in for our pleasure. I have to admit, because they told us right at the beginning, Hasbro, remember always that 1/3 of your audience is adult, which was interesting because I think they were like, Prime was a little dark, and Robots in Disguise is maybe a little young? Can you go somewhere in the middle? And remember that a third of your audience is adult. And when they said that, my immediate response was, oh, we can just write for ourselves, because we're kind of that. We're like 1/3 adult, and the rest is like kids. So that gave us a green light,
I think that turned out for the best because fans, especially in season 2, when you started introducing all of these guys, really grew on the show. Cyberverse drastically increased female representation in on-screen Transformer media. Was this from Hasbro wanting to push like new demographics and markets, or was this you guys wanting to push boundaries?
This was us. I mean, Hasbro did ask for a female Decepticon, which was a really cool idea because, there's not many, or were there any? There were some, yeah, and yeah. I mean, it was from us, from the staff. And when I say us, I really do mean us. This show, I guided it. I was the head writer, the story editor, but it was a group effort always. So everybody on the staff contributed. And also, we had Windblade, and I felt we got Windblade in a good place. Because I really hate the female, we're going to put a female in and make her a female kick-ass warrior. Okay, that's not really a character. It doesn't really have a personality in its own story, and it's been done a million times. So the trick was to try to figure out with each one, how can we make them people? And I think that was our attitude towards all the characters. How can we make them people that have their own stories, their own point of view, and you like them in different ways? And so the female characters, one of my favorite characters is Clover. I love Clover. And I look at Clover, and people were kind of, yelling at me through Twitter about oh, you stole that design. I did steal the design. I wanted to use that character, and they said, well, we want that character to remain male. But you can use the visual design. And so we brainstormed, came up with the name Clobber. And, Clobber, I feel, is a great addition. So I'm really proud of that, expanding, because why not? I don't know why they have genders in the first place. It makes no sense to me. But once you accept that, and you accept it's like a religion, and you accept that they turn into vehicles and all that stuff, then, having more stuff. If I had my wishes, we'd have all sorts of things going on. Because if you were a robot, wouldn't you could change gender any old time, right? Change your head, change your body, you transform. We just couldn't do that because of budget. There was a lot of stuff we wanted.
I was going to say there was an animation error in season 1 where Acid Storm flipped gender back and forth. Was that something on?
Yeah. No, that was an animation error that, really opened my mind to the idea of oh yeah, we could just do that. And so, we just let it stand and be what it is, because it made total sense to me, that a robot would do that. Why not? I would change my head a lot. In this interview, I'd probably duck out, come back with a new head, and exactly. So and I'm glad that happened.
I wanted to ask, in Cyberverse season 4, just about every major storyline got wrapped up, but there was one storyline that the show kind of dropped. And that was Shockwave and Soundwave's rivalry. Were there plans for that to go further?
There could have been. We talked about so many different possibilities, as we went through. And things got wintered out because it's 11 minutes, and also because the story started to take on its own, he died. That was one issue with that. But I would have liked to have seen that. I really loved their rivalry. I thought it was really cool. So no definite plans.
What would you say to someone who wants to go into the industry and work on Transformers shows? How did you get yourself kind of seen by the executives you talked about, and how did the writers get seen by you?
That's a good question. I think that so different ways. So for me, I've had a long career. I started on the Tick, worked on Celebrity Deathmatch. I worked on Super Robot, which is good. I worked on Turtles. Worked on a lot of things, and so I think my manager hooked it up for me to interview with them. So that's one way. You're already established, and you get invited to pitch or talk to them. And then Zach and Dan had both been working with Hasbro on previous shows. So Dan came up through production. I'm not sure exactly how Zach got involved, but he had been writing for Rescue Bots, I think, and I'm not sure if he wrote for RID. So they had previous Transformers experience. Gavin had Turtles experience. So we're talking about all people who had experience. Kate Leth, I don't know if she had experience. She might have come from a comic book background, but someone forwarded her to us at Hasbro. And you try to balance between people who are experienced and people who don't have much experience, so that you can put them in an environment where they can learn and become more skilled. And not all shows have writers' rooms, so we were fortunate to have that. But I feel in that environment you can learn a lot. So same thing with May Cat. Had no experience of being a staff writer and being in a writer's room, but she had 2 years of it by the time we were done. And the same thing with Asai. He had written specs, but I don't think he'd actually written a show before. So I think that you always try to balance, and that's where the break can come. And there's different ways. Nickelodeon has some kind of contest or whatever. I think the best thing to do is you have to write strong samples. And it seems like the trend now is original samples that are not like it used to be. You'd write a sample of a Transformers show or something. You write original samples and you try to get them in people's hands, and you can contact people through LinkedIn. You can try to contact management places. So that's the way. That's probably, you got to keep pushing. Animation's hard. I would say it's a hard industry. It doesn't pay as well as regular TV. It's about a quarter of live action and stuff. So it's something to do if you love it. I love it. I like being able to write exterior volcano explodes, and no one says, "Oh, we can't make a volcano explode. What are you talking about?" And no, they're just like, "Okay, volcano explodes. We can do that." I mean, that freedom. They're on the moon. We're not going to build a whole moon set. No, it's fine. They're on the moon. We can just put them on the moon. That's the freedom of animation, right? So.
Thanks for watching part 1 of my Randolph Heard interview. In part 2, we're going to talk about seasons 3 and 4. That includes the series finale, The Perfect Decepticon, which is not available in all territories at the time of this upload. We want to make sure everyone gets a chance to see it before it gets spoiled. We will also discuss the story behind the fans getting acknowledged on the tablets, and I will finally confront Randolph once and for all regarding Transformers Cyberverse constantly stealing ideas from my fan fictions.
We've been following you since I think early elementary school.
Oh my
God. And watching and seeing what we could steal.